I like to think of the good daughter syndrome as being at the intersection of good girl conditioning and difficult, for many different reasons, difficult mothers. So if you take a daughter who is naturally empathic, attuned, and sensitive, so she's born to a mother who is difficult. She might be bossy, intrusive, insecure, easily upset or dysregulated. And when this daughter is born to a mom like this, there's so many big moments, but also micro moments where the daughter is doing more of the emotional work to make the relationship work.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about mother-daughter relationships and generational trauma. I'm delighted to welcome Katherine Fabrizio. Katherine is a psychotherapist, mother, and the author of the best-selling, award-winning book, The Good Daughter Syndrome. You can reach Katherine at her website, daughtersrising.info, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Katherine. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I am excited to talk about this. I've had lots of wonderful guests, and yet you are the first person to bring up this particular issue. I
Okay.
think it's something that is more prevalent than perhaps we're aware of.
Yes, I think so. I think a lot of people resonate with it on different levels because it's such a big umbrella that some folks who have a slightly difficult mother will resonate with it, and other folks who have really difficult mothers can also resonate with it.
I agree. And I was thinking about that too. When you talk about we can have a mother who is dealing with something like narcissism, or they might be borderline. They might have some diagnosable issues. And then we also have maybe just cultural issues or just personality things where daughters can kind of get sucked into this role where if I am, put some air quotes, good daughter,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
then I allow my mother to control me, not only as a child, but for my entire life.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. It's kind of, I like to think of it, the good daughter syndrome, as being at the intersection of good girl conditioning and difficult, for many different reasons, difficult mothers. So if you take a daughter who is naturally empathic, attuned, and sensitive, so she's born to a mother who is difficult. She might be bossy, intrusive, insecure, easily upset or dysregulated. And when this daughter is born to a mom like this, there's so many big moments, but also micro moments where the daughter is doing more of the emotional work to make the relationship work. Because our survival brain knows from a very dependent time in our lives, we can't feed ourselves, we can't keep ourselves safe. We need the adult or the attachment figure, many times, not always, but many times a primary figure would be the mom. And so we learn to, love the one that we're with. And over time, and I can give examples of this, but over time and throughout development, if the daughter is adjusting and adapting to her mother's limitations, the relationship or the dynamic is molded in a certain way to where when the adult daughter grows up, she's so accustomed to appeasing mom, making sure mom gets her way, lots of things. Um, she tries to be good for mom. And this is so habitual. And I would say it's like most of it's unconscious. like an iceberg, you might just see the tip of the iceberg and say, oh, well, she's a good daughter. She attends to her mother. She pays attention to her. She stays in touch. But when the relationship is unbalanced and has been since childhood, you have the situation or the dynamic. As an adult, what you have that culminates is a daughter who's always working for mom's approval that never comes. She's always looking to see if mom's okay and okay with her. And you get a really unbalanced relationship. So there are all kinds of problems.
So, as I'm listening to this, it seems to come in such natural, almost baby steps. And
Yeah.
so it's the sort of thing where you don't even realize it's a problem until you are totally and completely ensnared. You mentioned that we have, as children, we instinctively recognize I am vulnerable. I am entirely dependent on my caregivers. And let's say it's my mother, because that's probably going to be the most common. But I have to please them. My survival depends on it. And as
Survival.
you're describing that, it's what Dr. Gabor Mate talks about when we're dealing with trauma. We need to survive. And this part of our survival is whatever it takes to mold into our environment as we are growing up. And so that's my first step. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is part of my survival. And yet, because it is an unhealthy attachment, an unhealthy learning, um, as we grow older, we still, now it's a habit. Now this is the way things are. This is what I expect. And it's just the way that it is. And so that unhealthy relationship, we don't break free from it as we grow older. And there's one comment that you made that I think is so important to reemphasize, and that is we are seeking approval. That will never come.
That will never come. Exactly.
And that's the problem. And it's when we're talking about being a good daughter and describing the actions that we take, that we're checking in with mother, that we're caring for mother, I have zero problem with the actions. The issue is not the what we're doing, it's the why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And not able to create a healthy boundary so that I matter too.
Exactly. I love that. So that I matter too. So, in psychological terms, what we need to do is differentiate, individuate. That's the trajectory of health. And if we're always preoccupied with mom's well being, with getting it right with mom's approval, then we never develop within, or it's not easy to develop within ourselves, our own internal reference points. I talk about 4 traps that we fall into because of this, and I call it the survival brain. And I say our survival brain signs contracts with mom's psyche. Mom doesn't even know this is going on, really. It's mostly like unconscious brain to unconscious brain. The first of which I call the never good enough trap. That's where we're working for mom's approval that never comes for various reasons. And it's never good enough. No matter what we do, she's not happy. She's not pleased. And the second trap that I talk about is the guilt trap, where we decide early on, I'm going to be responsible for mom's well being. As children, our survival brain makes this agreement, like signs on the dotted line before we consciously know this is happening. So we can only be okay if mom's okay and okay with us. That's the other thing. The third trap that I talk about is a self doubt trap. So, mom's fears sometimes for you, mom's doubts and fears about you, her criticisms, as we know, we internalize. So it becomes the mom critic in our brain. And we relate to that internalized mom when we're an adult. Sometimes she's no longer on, she's passed. And that internalized mom that we're relating to causes us to doubt ourselves, to second guess, because we're trying to please both ourselves and somebody who is never pleased. So if we internalize that person that's never pleased, we stay perpetually second guessing. If mom's alive, maybe checking in with mom. Is this okay? Do you think this decision that I made is all right? And if she's always tearing it down, and that becomes just a terrible feedback loop. And we lose touch with our internal sense of trust and just a general sense that we can make mistakes and live through them, and that our successes are ours and ours alone. And it's just not the end of the world. If we have an emotionally healthy figure who feeds back to us, oh, well, you messed up. What have you learned? On the other hand, if we have a impaired mom who might say, well, what's wrong with you? Or it's because you always do this or that, you always mess up, or what do you expect? Or somebody, or a mom who's just a worry wart. Well, what, always worrying about our decisions and are we going to mess up, and conveys the idea that we can't ever get it right. And we internalize that. So that's a third trap. And the fourth, I think, is particular to women. And that's, I call the mixed message trap. And that's the messages of support that are undergirded with messages of criticism or envy. So sometimes mom knows how to say the right thing. She might, because women generally do know what's considered to be supportive, but if she accompanies it with an eye roll or shoulder shrug or the backhanded compliment, well, you're not going to wear that, are you? Or, well, that's great, you got your new job, but you're going to have to put the kids in daycare. Or, there are kind of a gazillion examples of that, of a mom who undermines. And the daughter grows up needing to read the subtext. Like they'll say what she says and what she means are two different things. And so I grow up reading the subtext, and I don't really trust that people are telling me exactly what they mean when they relate to me.
Man, as you're describing those four traps, it sounds like that matches like 99.9% of the population as we're talking about, gosh, have I ever felt like I'm not good enough? Check. Have I ever felt guilty? Check. Have I ever questioned my decisions and wondered if I did it right? Yeah. And have I ever not trusted what somebody said because I think maybe what their body language or their tone is not matching their words? It's like, this is pretty universal. So now
That's it. That's a really good point, because I think the truth is in the nuances. So their mothers don't need to be perfect. Those of us who've mothered, raised kids, we know we mess up all the time. It's important. What we're talking about is if a mother is like never pleased. Like, yes, your
Okay.
mother's going to criticize you, some of the time. And if you never feel good enough, like I have clients who are incredibly accomplished in the world and they have all the markers of success, but internally, if they have one of these moms, like it's never good enough. Or if you feel like emotionally responsible for everybody that you're close to. It's one thing, like this is the way I describe it. Like it's the one thing to care about someone who you're connected with. And of course, you care about your mom. To feel responsible for her emotional well-being is a horse of a different color. It's kind of like you have your best friend goes through a bad breakup, and you go over there, you talk to her, you let her vent, you remind her of the days she was happy. You might even tear the guy down. You're gonna do all the things that women support each other and do for each other. And then you go home and you're able to get along with your own life. You might send her a text, and if somebody asks you, yes, you do care, but you're not completely preoccupied with her well-being. And you can have, I think that's a differentiated relationship as opposed to somebody that you care about, and that you can't be okay unless they're okay.
I think that that is so important that you brought this up and I even wrote it and put a little box around it when you mentioned that we feel responsible for another person's emotions.
Yeah.
And that is, and I loved how you'd explained it as there are nuances. It's almost a bit of a challenge, especially if you're in it, to kind of see the forest for the trees, because the normal, natural things that you described of a friend, of the compassion, of the support, of showing up and doing those things is perfectly healthy. But the problem is when we don't have a boundary that separates where I end and where you begin.
The other person begins. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
like, go ahead. Yeah.
it's like if I am not allowed to be happy or
Yeah.
at peace unless everyone is happy and at peace, which never happens, which means I never have permission to be happy and at peace. And it's
Yeah.
very heavy.
It is very heavy. It is very heavy. And if you've been indoctrinated is a strong word, but I think it carries a point. If you've been indoctrinated from childhood, you don't know that everybody doesn't feel that way. Um, you feel like everybody. And you know how we talk about regulation so much these days? So if mom's dysregulated, the normal healthy trajectory is that child immature psychological system becomes dysregulated, upset, and goes to mom, who should be emotionally more mature, you would hope, and kind of leans on and leans into that emotional maturity. If mom is easily dysregulated herself, then she's going to go off or withdraw or attack. And so the child becomes a regulator of mom. Nobody explicitly states it this way. Nobody means for it to be this way, but it's just what happens in the dynamic. So then when you have an adult daughter and mom's upset, she feels like in her gut, I can't, I can't relax until mom's okay. And I can't say anything that's going to disappoint her ever. Or, and I can talk a lot about boundaries, but I can't set up a boundary because she'll feel rejected. And then, she needs me. We're emotional conjoined twins.
Ooh,
It's
yeah.
like biological conjoined twins, are sharing maybe some of the same organs at the time. But an emotionally dysregulated relationship where the adult is dependent on the child instead of the other way around, you have an unbalanced, dysfunctional adult relationship. And when mothering goes well, it's not very dramatic. It's so it's so should I give some examples of
Oh,
what I'm
would you please? I just love that line. When mothering goes well, it's not dramatic. That just created a whole picture in my mind of the drama and how it shouldn't be there. It should be that peaceful, calming. Anyway, love that line. All right, I would love to hear your story.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I was in my early 30s. I finished my graduate studies, clinical training, was married to a very nice man, had two beautiful daughters, kind of had everything that I would ever hope for. And I felt so depressed. I was paralyzed with depression. Um, I was, this will make a lot of sense a little bit later, but I was went in practice with my mother, who was at the time a psychotherapist. It had been her dream to have a mother-daughter practice. Um, so I'm going to get back to the symptoms. I was just cried at the drop of a hat. I had no idea why. I couldn't tell you what my opinion was, what I thought about really anything. But I could tell you in a nanosecond if she was okay and okay with me.
Mm.
I was very, very attuned to that and worked very hard for her approval, but more so for her kind of emotional well-being. So I knew something was wrong, and I got into psychotherapy, even though I was a baby therapist at that time. And well, there wasn't the internet, and a narcissist was a man who was very braggadocious and obnoxious and, maybe a used car salesman or something. So like that, came to mind. And I thought my mother knew best. She's very smart and knew best, knew best for me. But I learned in psychotherapy, it was very nuanced, and that we were two peas in the pod, but one pea was always in charge.
Mm.
Every adult decision I passed by her. And if she didn't agree, I wouldn't do it. Buy a house, marry the guy. Um, we didn't even think about boundaries. It wasn't a thing back then. It wasn't a thing. Um, but there were three people in the marriage. Any decision that we had to make uh, she weighed in. She had at least an equal say, if not the main say. And my husband had grown up in a matriarchy, and I don't think he liked it, but he didn't really know how to stand up to it. And I didn't at the time. So I'll never forget the day I walked in her office, and with my heart in my throat, I said, "Mom, I need to leave home. I'm leaving the practice."
Mm. Mm.
It was almost like a disembodied voice. I could just hear myself saying the words. And I knew it would break her heart. But I also knew staying would break me. I knew it was unsustainable. And that was many, many years ago. And I'd like to say, well, we had this big dramatic moment and everything was smooth sailing from then on out. And it wasn't, but it was a pivotal moment. I left the practice and established my own practice. And over time, the depression lifted. I found my own voice. And we lived in the same town. She's since passed. But and I had children, her grandchildren, and we stayed involved. But what I had to learn, both for myself and my clients, stuck with me. And like each piece of it, I had to figure out, I had to sort out, I had to make all the mistakes. But eventually I really got a good handle on it. And so I wrote this book to shorten the learning curve for other women who find themselves in the same situation. I started to see it in my practice. I've been in practice probably 35 years. And even the mental health community didn't really identify this as a problem because when the good daughter's taking care of mom, so many other people benefit from it. Back in the day, 30 years ago, it was people the disruptors, who were ending up on a therapist's couch. So, like, women would come to me and they would have maybe gone through a bad breakup or stuck in a relationship with a narcissistic partner. And I would dig further. And so many times I would find either a narcissistic dad or narcissistic mom relationship that had set them up because the attachment template was set in stone. And of course, they were going to repeat that pattern in various ways.
And that
I would
comes
say
so naturally.
naturally.
To repeat the pattern, we tend to kind of attract that same kind of dynamic, which
Yeah.
is so frustrating. And is it okay if we kind of talk about a little bit more about some of the things that you experienced and some of the ways that you had a little bit of an awakening where you said that there were three people in the marriage, and that makes a marriage it's very challenging. I mean, marriage is challenging anyway, but when you're not just working with trying to keep two people happy, you're trying to keep three people happy. It compounds the problem and makes things issue, and that's hard. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And then as you were educated, and if your mom is also a therapist, you have education. I, and so, but it took some additional information before you were able to recognize, wait a minute, there's actually something wrong with my relationship.
That's me.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's not just these other people that I'm trying to help. And sometimes it takes sometimes it's challenging to see it in ourselves. We see it outside, but not inside. And so you mentioned the narcissistic. That was the problem, and that you had an idea of what that meant. But then you recognized that it applied to your situation. Can you help us understand a little bit more about that word, about how
Sure.
you knew what you thought you knew what it meant, but now you
Right.
have additional information?
I think back in the day, we just used to look at symptoms. Like, does somebody qualify for the diagnosis? But I was trained in psychodynamic psychotherapy that helped me look at defenses. So, and I would say, like I said, my mother has passed now, but like a lot of my clients, they come in with moms who have maybe borderline defense mechanisms and narcissistic defense mechanisms. So maybe even to rewind that, your listenership probably already knows this, but I'll review it a bit. So for a mom who has a borderline personality disorder, her core wound is abandonment. So a daughter's becoming her own person, pulling away, which happens many times over the lifespan, will trigger someone who has borderline defenses, will trigger their fears of abandonment. So they won't let go, they'll cling very tightly. And my mother certainly had some of those characteristics and those defense mechanisms. Of course, a narcissistic mom is going to need to be right. It's more about power. She's going to need to feel superior. She's going to need to be the boss. There are other things, but her main wound is feeling shame and self loathing, which she covers up to herself and to other people by being special and right and on top of things. So, as a daughter tries to establish herself, or as I tried to establish myself, my mother was very triggered by my pulling away and becoming my own person. And she would do things to guilt me. She would um, really make my life hell if I pulled away enough, put herself in the center of my emotional life. Like a birthday, what are you and I going to do for your birthday? I was remembering that the other day. Um, I thought she really knew best. She would tell me what to do. She gave me advice on how to raise my kids, on how to do therapy. So it wasn't as obvious. And plus, this was 30 years ago. Again, no internet. Um, and I had to really learn the psychodynamics of it. And probably your listenership will identify with this. We would have email exchanges that would go back and forth, just exhaustive. And I hear this a lot from my clients because the daughter's trying to argue her case. And if mom doesn't have the reflective capacity, she's just not going to give it to her daughter. She will choose engagement over being terrified of the separation. Does that make sense?
Wow, I have just loved this, and I've been taking notes as fast as I can. I have never heard those terms of the borderline and the narcissistic explained so beautifully in terms of the core wound. And when you describe it in those terms, it takes a person who is maybe diagnosed with this or has it, whether or not they're diagnosed, but is exhibiting those kinds of behaviors, it also implicitly includes some compassion in that the
Yes.
person is coping and responding to their core wound. And I thought, wow, that just kind of blows my mind because we're dealing with the effects that are dealing from someone else's problem and they're trying to handle their effect and grasping at straws to fill the hole within their own heart. And I can have compassion for mothers who, and just people who are dealing with it. And yet, it does not mean that I have to be a happy doormat to let myself be walked on to meet their needs, because unfortunately, I can't. And as we talked about before, no matter what I do, it isn't going to fill the hole in their heart because they have to fill the hole in their heart. And it is not appropriate or possible for someone else to do it for them. So that just, oh my gosh, my mind is just a whirl on thinking about we're people, we're trying to survive. We're
Right.
hurting and we're trying to be safe. We're trying to fill our needs
Right.
in
Everybody. Yeah.
right in ways that are not healthy. And when you
Mhm.
talk about when your core wound is abandonment
Mhm.
and the I don't know what the word would be, antidote, the
Mhm.
solution
Mhm.
of for a
Solution.
daughter is I have to create a boundary. It most likely will be interpreted by the mother as
Mhm.
additional abandonment. And so I can see how that pull is just exacerbated. It's just, oh my gosh, if I do what I need to do in order for me to be healthy, it really is going to hurt them. And yet it's the kind of hurt, almost like the ripping off a band-aid, where it needs to take place in order for actual healing to take place for both parties.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not a cruelty.
Mm-mm.
And I think this
But it
is,
will hurt.
it will hurt, but it's like if an alcoholic begs you to give them a drink.
Ooh, nice
And
connection.
and you have to, okay, it's going to hurt them. They really want this drink. And they think, you think of a narcissistic supply or a borderline, okay, I'll come over right away, mom. You need me right now. I'll be the answer. I'll be the fix. I'll be the drink. But that difference between having compassion and understanding somebody else's desperation and enabling them, when you're really straight in your own mind, what's enabling, what's good for both of you, even though they can't see it at the time. And I mean, you just described intergenerational wounding. That's how it happens. I mean, there are some moms who are maybe on the sociopathic end of the spectrum, and we could talk about that. But I think most people are just trying to survive. So, understanding, like, people, why do I need to know about narcissism or borderline, this and that? Not to condemn your mother, not to have another, arrow to point at her. Although sometimes you're mad enough, that's a beginning, and I understand that. Uh, but ultimately, it's to understand what they're driven to do. It's like if you have a glass of water and somebody comes and jerks a glass of water out of your hand, you're like, well, that's rude and intrusive and all kinds of terrible things. But if you're on a rescue squad and you're going into the desert and you see somebody who hasn't had water in 3 days, I don't know if you can survive that, and they grab the glass out of your hand, you understand that they're driven to do so, that their survival instinct is to grab that from you. So, so to come back over to denying a mom who's borderline or has these narcissistic defenses, for one thing, if she's been doing it with you your whole life, she's used to getting it. So when you break a cycle, you don't know how many generations back, and particularly the good daughter cycle. I mean, how many? um, daughters have been in that good daughter role across traditions, religions, cultures, the more disempowered women are, the more they have to get their power somewhere. And sometimes they're going to look for their daughter, lord power over their daughter. Here, you make up for my deficits. I don't think any of this is conscious, but I think it happens I'm not a cultural expert, but I think it happens on a cultural plane. So sometimes, the culture reinforces these unrealistic expectations. I think that's another reason why it's so hard to deny mom. You hear you only have one mom. Nobody loves you like your mother. And motherhood, as a mother myself, motherhood has pulled out of me some of the best that's in me. But I've also made some mistakes.
I don't know
It
who hasn't, because we're mortal and we're
hasn't.
doing the best we can. So I'm thinking here, how many listeners are listening to this conversation and feeling, oh my gosh, that's me. That's how I feel. That's what my relationship is like. And so if we have someone who is now kind of awakening and becoming aware that, the relationship that I have, that I love and I hate, is not healthy. And maybe there's a better way. So, do you have some first steps for, let's say, I'm just becoming aware of, wow, my relationship with my mother isn't healthy. What do I do next?
Mhm. I can even start off with what not to do. And that sometimes
Perfect. Sometimes that's what we need.
that's as helpful. The instinct, it's so funny, not funny, is to run to mom and go, look, you meet all these criteria. What you're doing isn't healthy. Thereby reinforcing that she's the one that has the power. She's the one that gets to say. And I have certainly been guilty of that. That's the endless emails and uh, you know, um, that rarely works because it's it's really asking for approval and permission in a disguised way. And we're to be forgiven for that because that's what we've been trained to do. So if you can, it takes a while to prepare. So if you learn about narcissism and borderline personality disorder. And of course, I'm going to point to my book, which I go into great detail, enough, again, not to just have more arrows that you can sling at mom, but to see where she's coming from. So when you deprive her of something, you know what it is you're triggering and you know why you're doing it. The other thing, and again, it's kind of in reverse order, I'll give you an example of boundary setting that goes awry. So, say Christmas is mom's holiday, and everybody goes to the ends of the earth to come to her. But so it's coming up on Christmas or Hanukkah, the winter holiday, and your kids are teenagers and they don't want to be away from their friends, and you are sick and tired of spending every Christmas Eve in a crowded airport. So you muster up your courage. You've read an article online about boundaries. Maybe they're one of mine. And so you muster up your courage. You call mom up and you say, "Hey, mom, and we're not coming to Christmas this year. We think about staying home. If that's okay with you, that wouldn't be too much trouble. You understand, don't you?" And then, the deafening silence that we're all good daughters are familiar with. And you're like, oh crap, I've done it now. And mom, well, you've always come. I don't know. What did I do? I guess I'm just a horrible mother. Or some very defensive, reactive response. And you're like, oh gosh, I don't know what I was thinking. Oh, that's ridiculous. Of course we'll be there. Just forget we ever had this phone call. And you hang up because you haven't done, understandably, you haven't done the preparation. Or you get furious. And this is what I would do. I would resent. And then when I would just have had enough, So, I'm a good girl. I don't like to explode. I conflict averse. So I would explode and it would come out in a kind of garbled, um, unhinged, overreactive for the situation way. And I would feel all flummoxed. And then I would end up, mom would just look at me, well, what's going on with you? When your mother's a psychotherapist, she can throw that at you. What's going on with you? And I would be, oh, I don't know. I'm just mad at my husband. And I would triangulate or deflect or just say, I've just had a whole lot on my mind. So it's almost counterintuitive. I think you have to really understand a whole lot about what's going on, what has gone on in the past by looking at your childhood, because these patterns pretty insidious. Like, how did it go when you went to kindergarten? Did you get stomach aches? Did you have separation anxiety? What happened when you were in elementary school? Did your mom choose your friends? What happened? Of course, this is a big one in adolescence. Was it tense? Because I've had two teenagers. Was it tense or was it Armageddon? Again, the nuance is important. Did she take your pulling away and wanting to establish like your own musical tastes or how you wore your hair or your friends? Did she take that as an affront to her authority? Or did she let you, differentiate within bounds that were appropriate and kept you safe? So a lot of thinking, a lot of preparation, even, what happened, your discussions with your mom. How was grandma about hot topics, religion, sex, money, choosing a spouse? So gathering some history, I think, can be really important. And then preparing to set a small boundary. Small boundary, but be prepared for a huge pushback, which is counterintuitive. We tend to want to go in, with the biggest thing. You're not going to do this anymore, and you're not going to do this anymore, and this anymore. That rarely goes over. That would just explode the relationship. Now, given what kind of feedback you get, how much pushback you get, how much indignation, or maybe if mom's severely borderline, she's going to make a suicidal threat. You can gauge, that can happen. Little bitty boundary, right? A reasonable, like maybe we're not going to spend Christmas, or I just want to have dinner every month rather than every Sunday. Something that is reasonable. And get your spouse on board, your partner on board, your friendship group, your therapist, maybe your support group. Set the little boundary, and then in all your self-care practices, which you're very good at, set the little boundary and then brace for pushback. It's interesting because the greater the pushback, probably the more the boundary was needed.
And I think that's important to recognize that boundary was needed. So as you're describing kind of the situation, so I'm listening and it feels very familiar. What you're talking about probably applies to me. And then the next step is don't run to mom and ask for permission. And we also don't want to be combative or confronting. But perhaps just becoming aware is our first step.
It's a big step. Yeah.
And recognizing that we probably need some self-care and some self-healing. And you've described, it almost sounds like we are preparing for battle. And because it probably is going to be a battle, there is going to be some pushback. There's going to be, as we try to make a change that involves more than one person, I'm going to get pushback from the other person because we're used to what we're used to. It's been working fine for me, so why do you want to change anything? And so Anyway, that's my takeaway is I'm listening to you is I need some more information. I need some more information and I need some self-healing. So probably it might be a good idea to grab a copy of your book, The Good Daughter Syndrome, and say, and what else? And what worked for you? And what kind of response do I need to be prepared for? And am I ready for that? And if I'm not ready for the big pushback, then maybe, like you said, let's start with something small. Let's not start with Christmas if Christmas is going to be the end of the world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but something that I can almost kind of test the water with. If I get a ginormous pushback over something tiny, a mountain response for a molehill request, this is some evidence that I really do have a problem. And I
Mm-hmm.
really do need some boundaries for my well-being and for hers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're breaking a cycle, particularly if you have children of your own, and you're an example to your children. You may, if this needs to happen, save your partnership, save your marriage. Maybe even something as slight as you have like something personal come up, and instead of telling mom first, tell somebody else. Restrain yourself. Or this is an exercise I have in the book. Walk around your house and look at the items in your house and think, is this me or not me? I can't tell you how many daughters have said, half of my furniture is stuff my mother picked out. My wedding was really my mother's affair, not mine. My clothes are literally, I had my mother's hand-me-downs. It's hilarious. She was petite, and I'm very tall and look better in dramatic clothing. She looked better in little bitty collars and stuff. But she would give me her clothes, and I would expect to wear them, and I looked like ridiculous in them. But just that level of differentiation, like, who am I? What are my values? Maybe mom's extremely social. Maybe I'm more introverted. Um, maybe I like soft, quiet friends and mom likes big, splashy, or the other way around. Because this stuff is so insidious that you could spend a long time working on yourself and realizing ways in which you all have been enmeshed that you could begin to differentiate that have nothing to do with actually approaching her.
I love that. It feels like a safe beginning because as we talked about, as we're creating boundaries, this is is between two people. It is where I end and where you begin. And
Mhm.
that, but if I'm walking around my house and just trying to figure out, hold on, before I'm ready to separate from you, from me, I need to know who I am. Who am I? And ask those questions. What do I like? What do I think? What do I prefer? And then become me so that when I separate or create those boundaries, I don't feel lost.
Mhm. Mhm. It's almost like we get so used to being like these conjoined emotional twins that it's easy to slip into mom has to be bad in order for me to be good.
Hmm.
Whereas separation and individuation is more about I want to become my own person. It might not be mom's idea of who I should be, and who she thinks I should be might not be bad. It's just not my idea. So many people get this confused. I call it the zero sum game. Even to say to mom, I hear that's your idea for me, but I need to figure out who I'm going to marry, what profession I'm going to pursue or occupation, or what clothing is appropriate for me, or how much I want to weigh, or if I want to dye my hair purple or not. I need to make those decisions for me. And even if they're a mistake, I need to learn the lessons for me.
I love that. And I appreciate that you brought up the idea of the good and the bad. We talked from the beginning, we talk about being the good daughter. The word good, for many of us, probably most of us, we want to do good. We want to be good. And yet sometimes we look at people as kind of that black, white. We are good, we are bad. And when we have a relationship that is not healthy, it's a knee jerk that maybe she's bad. And yet that's not necessarily it. We don't have to have a good person and a bad person. It's just figuring out who I am and who you are. And we're all a mixture of good and, flaws. We can call that bad or whatever, but we don't have to demonize our mother in order for us to be healthy.
Because ironically, the demonization makes us feel guilty, which is the emotion
Hey, let's bring some more guilt into this, shall we?
Now, I will say difficult is on a continuum. And people want to know, like, how do I tell the difference between an impossible mom and one that can change? $60 million question. But I once had this client whose mother was drinking yet collecting chips in AA. She would break in line. She would break the law without any thought to it. And just like if you look at the other behavior, and there are just people um, engage in criminal activity, they'll lie and they feel no remorse to everybody. Whether it's getting tickets, breaking in line, or it's something really important. So you can look at that. And I never want to discount, because sometimes I hear from daughters who, sometimes I can't get it right. Some daughters think I'm too hard on mom. Or moms think I'm too hard on mom. I get those emails. And then some daughters say, well, you don't understand. My mom's, a criminal or whatever. And I had to go no contact for my own well-being. And those mothers definitely do exist, and I fully support them. But I think there's probably a lot more in the middle. And the thing is, if you start to set these boundaries and you flex that muscle, if she truly is impossible, she will exile herself. It will turn into no contact or very little contact out of just the consequences, out of your differentiation and standing up for yourself. You don't have to condemn her. You just have to stand up for yourself. And if she can't come along in any way, it kind of takes care of itself.
That is both hopeful and sad because that's a change. And as you talked about this continuum and you used the word can change, and I just want to clarify that when we're talking about can change, to remember that I am not responsible for changing my mom. I am responsible for changing me. And I believe when you said can change, I'm assuming what you meant is that my mother is going to be able to adapt to my new boundaries and this new form of relationship that is mutually beneficial rather than mutually deterrent.
Mhm.
But we're never responsible for changing our mom or anyone else.
Just, yeah, it's just will make you depressed very fast, because doing the
You can't do it.
possible. Yeah. And it's funny because it's almost a certain level of humility, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you go in there with all barrels loaded or guns blazing, and you say, you're doing this and you're doing that and you're doing that, it rarely goes well. And there's a little bit of hubris in that. If you say, if you talk about my weight and I've asked you to stop, I'm not going to want to be around you, mom. And she still does it, then, certain consequences follow. You have to follow through with those consequences. But I think particularly good daughters really want to lean into doing what's right.
Right. Oh, what a beautiful way to kind of sum this up. We have always been trying to do what's right.
Always, that's a great way to put it.
But I think we need a better understanding of
Yeah.
what that means.
It's like when good, the opposite of good, as in good daughter, is not bad. When good means subservient, obedient, that's not good for anybody. When good means independent, compassionate, differentiated, powerful, standing on our own 2 feet, that's the kind of good I'm talking about.
Sign me up to be that kind of good daughter. All right, Katherine, this has been delightful. Is there anything that you want to make sure that we cover before we close today?
Oh, I think that you just is such a wonderful questioner, and the compassion just shows on your face. You're so easy to talk to. Thank you so much. And the way you reframe everything it's amazing. You just take it in, and I think it really helps the listener, hear it 2 different ways and have it summed up.
Oh, I appreciate you very much. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Brene Brown. She said, "Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others."
Mm.
Today, I invite our listeners to love ourselves enough to set boundaries. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for tuning in to Linda's Corner podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends to help us inspire even more listeners. Be sure to visit hopeforhealingfoundation.org for free and affordable resources to help you overcome life's challenges. And explore healingbreathworkdetox.com, where you'll find transformative tools for deep inner healing and lasting change. Also, don't forget to check out my books, Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. Your journey to hope, healing, and happiness starts here.